Good morning, everybody. This is Jeff J. Brown, China Rising Radio Sinoland on the beaches of Normandy. And I'm feeling a little bit nostalgic because I'm going to go 6 hours to the east, back to Thailand, where my wife and I lived for almost a year. And today I have on the show Brian. Is it Berletic or how do you pronounce your last name?
Berletic.
Berletic, Brian Berletic, yes. Who I've actually known for years. We've actually been email friends going back for years, and but he had a different name, and so what I want to do is thank you so much for coming on, Brian, and just go ahead and tell you have an amazing story. Of course, I read all your stuff, and I read how you came out of the ID closet and your reasoning is just a fascinating story, and going back, so tell us about your career as a journalist, why you started, why you came out of the ID closet, and then you're an expert on Thailand, and then we'll move to that. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, so anyway, also thank you very much, Jeff, for having me on. And so it started, I joined the Marines right out of high school. I was still 17 when I went to basic training. I was electro-optical ordnance repairman, which means I worked on advanced weapon systems like fire control for tanks and anti-tank missiles and things like that. And I spent almost all of my time in Japan. I never went to a combat zone, and because of my specialized occupation, I probably would never have gone into combat, but I did see enough of what the US was kind of doing around the world with my own eyes to where it kind of disillusioned me. When I got out of the Marine Corps in around 2004, I decided, and that was the time the US was gearing up to invade Iraq, I decided I wasn't going to be done in my name, and I didn't even want to live in the US. So I had visited Thailand as part of Cobra Gold. It's like a US-Thai annual training exercise. I had visited Thailand, and I decided, okay, I know Japan, I know Thailand. I'll just go back to Thailand. I liked Thailand a lot, and I've been living there ever since. And how I got into writing and geopolitical analysis was simply just reading the news and just being frustrated with knowing that what I was being told by the Western corporate media was lies. And at the time, the alternative media was still, gaining steam. And I just decided, instead of being frustrated and tapping away at the comment sections, on all these websites, just make my own blog and start contributing. So it's just kind of progressed from there. I'm not actually a professionally trained journalist or anything like that. I'm just a citizen journalist or a citizen geopolitical analyst, and I've been doing it ever since, probably real serious since 2010, 2009, 2010, because I was living in Thailand and I saw the US interference here, and I saw them backing these groups that were extremely violent. They burned half the city down in 2010, and I just thought, I have to get this out to the world. The BBC, CNN, all of them were just I was seeing it with my own eyes. And I know that they knew what was going on, and they were deliberately lying about it. So that's when I really got serious about writing.
And so why, two questions. Why did you, first off, Land Destroyer is quite an interesting name for your blog. And then why did you go with the nom de plume and call yourself Tony Cartalucci all this time until just about a month ago you finally came out of the ID closet? What's that about?
Okay, so Land Destroyer was actually a blog that I started when I was actually in the Marine Corps, and I had an interest in history and tanks, and sometimes tanks are referred to as land destroyers. And I just kept the name. I just figured it doesn't. There's so many, you want to talk about conspiracy theories. There's a lot of conspiracy theories about why it's named. It really is as simple as that. It started out as like just a practice website because I was coding in HTML and stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
And Tony Cartalucci was just a name that friends of mine back in high school was like an inside joke because I'm half Italian.
Oh, okay.
And I'm also half Russian. Berletic is like a Slavic surname. And it was like an inside joke, Cartalucci. So I just stuck with that as a pen name. Now, why I picked the pen name was, like I said, in 2010, they were killing people in the streets. There had been violence leading up to that. The Thaksin Shinawatra, this billionaire ex-prime minister, he had killed thousands of people, especially during his war on drugs. And
Yeah.
I just did it out of concern for my safety. I'm not that well known even now, and back then I was nothing at all, and I just figured it's the minimum that I can do to try to protect myself and the people around
Okay.
me.
All right,
Yes,
got it. All right. Well, wow, half Italian and half Russian.
yes,
That's a great combination. Well, Brian, my wife and I, we spent almost a year in Thailand. We were, in fact, if we hadn't had this family emergency to have to rush back here to France to save the family home from being sold out from under sold out from by an unscrupulous trustee. We'd still be in Thailand, and we loved it, and we were learning the language, and we learned the alphabet, and we were going to school, and we traveled around, and we just we were big fans of Thailand and loved the people, culture, and I we studied the history somewhat, but you obviously been there for now what 16 years, and I realize we don't have all day, but can you just give us a quick sort of a thumbnail sketch, Thailand 101, and then if you can maybe recommend a book. I understand there's a really good book in English about Thailand's history, kind of from the perspective of the Thais. If you know that book, let us know. But just a brief overview of history, the monarchy, their wariness of foreigners. And I don't know if I read this, how they used the Japanese in World War II so they could keep the French and the British out in the north, which I thought was an incredible story. Just give us for those of the fans and followers out there who don't know a lot about Thailand, just kind of give us maybe a 5-minute rundown on its history, please.
Okay, so I think the most important thing for people to understand is that the monarchy is part of an institution that is over 700 years old. And all throughout Thailand's history, it has been a unifying force in Thai society. And just an example, back during the age of pirates, these were Europeans who didn't like their own monarchies. They were often, doing things against monarchies in other European countries. But when they came to Siam, which is what Thailand used to be known as, the one monarchy that they actually did respect was the Thai monarchy, because they realized that if they created a problem with him, they were creating a problem with the entire country, and they would be unable to do any business at all with then Siam, today Thailand. And this has continued through all of the centuries. This current dynasty, the Chakri dynasty, is almost as old as the US is as a country. And it's Thailand is the only country in Southeast Asia that was never colonized. And yeah, all throughout their history, they have been fighting off Western imperialism. And they did it, by kind of staying in the middle and kind of balancing one large power against the other and kind of diversifying their ties. Sometimes they would make concessions. And they were right in the middle of the British and the French fighting
Mm-hmm.
over all these other countries. So every country on Thailand's borders and even parts of China were being taken over by Europe. And Thailand was the only country in the whole mix of things that was never colonized. And so you mentioned the Japanese during World War II. Yet that was another example of Thailand making concessions. The Japanese basically tried to invade Thailand. There was fierce fighting, but it didn't last long. And I think what they were trying to do is just to show the Japanese how difficult it would be to take the country by force. So what they did instead was make kind of an agreement.
Mm-hmm.
And it did exactly what you said. It kept the French and the British out. It actually allowed Thailand to regain some of the territory that over the centuries they had to give up to the British and the French. especially the French regarding Cambodia and Laos. And so that was the story there. They weren't really, diehard allies with the Japanese.
Yeah.
They just didn't want anyone.
Yeah, it was a
Yes,
convenience to keep the I think they preferred Asians than than
yes,
Europeans.
yes.
Well, yeah, for
And
those of you, let me just say, for those of you who don't have a visualization of Thailand, you've got Malaysia, which was British back then, to the south. You had Burma, which is now Myanmar, to the west, which was British. That's where George Orwell was. And then you had the French in Indochina and Laos and Cambodia on the eastern side. So I mean, Thailand was like sandwiched in empire, and they managed to not get colonized. I mean, that's just unbelievable. That shows wise leadership.
yes, and that's owed to the monarchy. And a similar scenario played out during the Vietnam War. A lot of people, this myth endures even to this day that somehow Thailand is this stooge state of the U.S. because of its relationship with the U.S. during the Vietnam War. That was another case where Thailand figured it's better to let the U.S. in and use it as a base, and kind of having this uneasy alliance with the U.S. like they had with the Japanese, to keep from happening to Thailand what the U.S. was doing to Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, which they were decimating all three of those countries.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Laos, I think, had
Genocide and war crimes. I mean, that's what it was.
yes, exactly. And they had this communist party in Thailand, but this is kind of murky because it's hard to figure out if that was genuine communism, or if this was because the US was doing a lot of things even back then, just like they do with the terrorists now. It's hard to tell which groups were being genuine, which ones were being used as proxies of the US to kind of keep Thailand obedient and under its thumb. Is very hard to tell. For example, the communists had this base in Udon Thani, and that's also where the CIA's base was. It just was it's a coincidence? I don't know. So anyway, there's a lot of stuff that went on back then, but as we're probably going to talk about next, Thailand has totally pivoted away from the US. So people need to keep that in mind. That was decades ago. That was last century. Thailand today in this century is a totally different story.
If you ever go to well, I'm sure you go there, but when you go to Chiang Mai, there's I just had her name anyway, Dash. There's a really, really, really good restaurant there called Dash, DASH. And funny enough, the owner was a communist guerrilla for like 20 years, and here she is now. She's like this very, very sophisticated, Thai woman. And anyway, she was up in northern Thailand for 20 years in the bush. I'm sure she has some really interesting stories. She's really a lovely lady, and the food is outstanding. But anyway, thank you for that. Yeah, I think it's funny. I asked my wife, she's French, and I said, tell me all the good kings in France, and she could only name one, and that was Louis the 11th, and of course he was made Saint Louis. He was actually sanctified, beatified by the church. But I always say they beatified him because he was the responsible for the Crusades and brought billions of dollars back to the church, slaughtering millions and millions of Slavs and Muslims. But I think what it's difficult for Westerners to comprehend the fact that there are countries that have mostly good leaders. China, mostly good leaders, and I don't think Thailand would be where it is today if most of the kings were bad. I think probably most of the kings were at least neutral, if not quite good, especially the last one. King Bhumibol. So, do you feel like the monarchy has had mostly wise beneficial governance for the people over the last 700 years?
Yeah, I would definitely say yes. The reason why Thailand is the way it is today, where it's a strong country, it's a unified country. It's not, it's not a superpower, but if you really look, it's got the second largest economy in Southeast Asia, even though it
After
doesn't have
Indonesia.
the second large, yeah, it doesn't have the second largest population, but it does have so development here is good. Um, again, there's a lot of misconceptions. It has a monarchy, and the current government is kind of military linked. So people just assume that it's a right wing regime, right? But this isn't true. They have universal health care, which, as an American, I've never known anything like that in my life.
Mm-hmm.
They have public housing. The King Rama IX, he spent his whole life teaching people about building their wealth in a very sufficient manner, avoiding debt. And this was at a time where the economic crisis, the World Bank, the IMF, when they were, doing this predatory lending all around the world, including in Southeast Asia, and this was in the 90s, where the economy collapsed all across the region. It
Mm-hmm.
was people who were following his theory of sufficiently building up their wealth, step by step, and avoiding debt. These are the people that were able to prevail, and there was millions of them, and it kind of, the vector sum was the country being able to weather that, and this has happened actually a couple of times during hard economic times for the region and for the world, where Thais, because they have this strong sense of self-sufficiency and
Mm-hmm.
staying out of debt, that they've been able to kind of weather these storms, these economic storms. So yeah, the monarchy has contributed a lot past and present.
Yeah, we were amazed when we were living in Chiang Mai. I mean, you turn off onto off a road, like a road that you wouldn't think goes anywhere, and then there's this bustling little neighborhood back in there, with all these houses and all the mom and pop shops. And I mean, they're very entrepreneurial, and they're very, you can really see. And like, I really felt bad for one guy. He had tried a little stand in front of his house, but this was when there was the COVID, everything was being shut down. He didn't make it, but the fact that they're out there trying, and I saw someone else, like trying to open up a little coffee stand, and again with COVID, it was tough for them, but they really do have this sense of, you can see it, this sense of self-sufficiency, which goes back to Mao Zedong actually, but this sense of self-sufficiency and entrepreneurship and independence, really, really. I mean, and they're just in our little area. Just in our little area. I mean, there was probably 1,000 shops and restaurants and stuff. It's an impressive culture.
Yes, and it's like that all around the country. I mean, if you go to the south, you'll see entire communities where they practice the king's self-sufficiency theory. And like for example, I don't know if people are familiar with the Yingluck Chinawat was the sister of billionaire ex-Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra. She had this rice subsidy scheme where she promised way above market prices for per ton for rice. And eventually it got looted by her own party members. It ran out of funding, and they were unable to pay rice farmers for over 6 months. Like, who do you know that can go 6 months without getting paid for their work? Nobody, right? But in the South, where people really, really put into practice the king's theory of self-sufficiency, they already avoided monoculture, where they were just growing rice. They already were growing fruits and vegetables. And this was something that they were able to fall back on. And because they also avoided debt and they built their wealth, when they didn't get paid for their rice for 6 months, they didn't have huge amounts of debt to pay off. And they had a fallback plan with these other crops that they were already growing, because when a crisis hits, it's too late to start growing
Yeah, yeah,
something
yeah,
new.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, in Chiang Mai, there were several places where they had called the Royal The
The Royal
Royal,
Project.
yeah, the Royal Project stores, and these were the the Monarchy stores that they opened up, where you could go in and buy, flowers and avocados and lettuce and all these uh, high value crops, and we were told that these were coming mainly from the north, where King Bhumibol, he worked really hard to purge Thailand of the of the opium and heroin
Yes.
trade in the Golden Triangle, and the carrot to get them to stop growing opium and processing heroin was to start growing these high value, cash crops so that they can make a good living. So is that what you've heard too? Is that
Yes,
yeah, yeah,
absolutely. And actually, a lot of the coffee and tea that a
yeah,
lot of
that's
people drink
right. I
is
forget. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
from Thailand, and
Yeah,
those fields, those farms took the place of opium fields, and that is how the king of Thailand decided to deal with drugs, which starkly contrasts to this darling of the West, Thaksin Shinawatra, who was just mass murdering people. Most of them had absolutely nothing trade, and he was just out there killing people, and he didn't offer any alternative. And a lot of people suspect he was allowing his police to just eliminate their own personal enemies, and
yeah,
also
yeah.
to displace one drug cartel and just have people allied to him take
Yeah.
over. So you could see the compare and contrast between what the king, who's demonized by the West, was doing to solve these problems, and it's an enduring solution. So even after he passed on, I mean, coffee and tea grown in Thailand is a huge industry
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
That's something that has endured. What about Thaksin? I mean, as soon as his 3-month drug war was over, it didn't change anything, and it's still a problem today.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I forgot about the coffee and the tea because we visited a couple of coffee plantations up in the north, and it's just beautiful up there. It's just
yes,
spectacular.
yes,
Hopefully, one of these days we'll get to go back with
yes. I
with
hope so. Yeah, I hope
with
so.
COVID, and the first Thai meal and Singha beer is on me.
Okay.
Well, listen, you have written a lot. I mean, a lot about Thailand, and I read it all. I think I even maybe posted one of your articles a while back. But anyway, just give us a little bit of an idea about Thailand vis-a-vis China. Explain for the friends, fans, and followers out there what ASEAN is, and how Thailand relates to it. As you mentioned, Thailand has the second biggest economy in Southeast Asia after Indonesia, which has three and a half times as many people, and yet and Thailand has a bigger economy than Vietnam, and Vietnam has more people than Thailand. So as you said, it's an extremely industrious country. Just tell us about China, Thailand, maybe the rail line from Kunming down to Singapore, through Laos, ASEAN, and then compare that with what's going on with the West.
Okay. So ASEAN is basically, it's sort of like it's a political economic union, but it's not as um, coherent as the European Union, for example. National sovereignty takes precedence, and so it's just kind of a loose association between these nations. Yes, they have different visa arrangements and things like that, but a lot of it is still done, nation to nation instead of as a bloc. But that's basically what ASEAN is. And I think a lot of people wanted to make it like the European Union, but then they looked at the European Union and they're like, no, maybe that's not a good idea. Let's keep it like this. Um, so for Thailand, the time that I've been here, I've watched, and you can go look at economic data over the last 10 to 20 years, and you can see how, as China has risen, how it has not just Thailand, but as it's transformed all of Asia, and everyone is pivoting with this shift of economic power from west to east. So I remember when I was here, all the tourist signs were in English or Japanese, and now everything is being written in Chinese and also Russian. And
Yeah.
why is that? And the reason why is because now, as China rises, as the standards of living rise in China, more and more people are traveling abroad. And for Thailand, the largest number of tourists that come into the country are from China. And so many Chinese tourists come here, it's more than every Western country combined,
Wow.
just from China. And then actually, after China, the next largest groups are all nations in ASEAN, in Southeast Asia. So
Wow.
you can definitely see how the West, economically, politically, militarily, has just kind of shrunk from the region, and how it's being displaced by this new, you could say, order or paradigm that China is leading. And it's this, this multipolarism that we hear China and Russia talk about all the time. And just another example, I used to live someplace where military helicopters flew over, and they always used to be Black Hawks made by the US. And then
Mhm.
recently I saw Russian helicopters, and I was like, do they have Russian helicopters? Yes, they started replacing some of their Black Hawks with Russian transport helicopters. And something that people might not know is that Thailand is replacing all of their old US military hardware with Chinese, mostly Chinese alternatives. So all their main battle tanks are being replaced by
Mhm.
BT-4s from China, armored personnel carriers, light armored vehicles. They have, I believe, one submarine has already been
Mhm.
ordered and is
Yeah, I
on the
read
way, and
that.
they're talking
Yeah, I read
about two more, which have been delayed because of political reasons. But essentially, and people don't realize this, when you buy 3 submarines, you're not just buying a submarine. You're buying maintenance agreements, training, and so much more. You're buying military and political ties when you buy something
that.
as
Mhm.
significant as these diesel electric submarines that Thailand is buying
Wow.
from China.
Amazing.
Let's see. Yes,
Go ahead.
and yeah, and China is Thailand's largest economic partner by far, and and after China, again, it's all countries in Asia that Thailand depends on economically. Not the West so much. I mean, you could see, if you look at the economic data, you could see it just fading over time, just going down, down, down. And so no matter what the U.S. tries to do to correct this, until they look at the fundamentals of their economy, they're not going to be able to fix it. So what they're trying to do is throw wrenches into
Yeah,
the
yeah.
works.
With all
Yeah,
these protests,
exactly.
NED, CIA, Department of
Yes,
State
exactly.
protests that they're
Yeah.
having now. Well, they're pissing up a rope because I don't I don't think the ties are going to fall for it. So, by the way, for those of you who don't who want to maybe look more into it, the the acronym is ASEAN, and I'm pretty sure it stands for the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And very, very dynamic group. They meet frequently. And tell us just quickly, Thailand figures very, very much into China's big Belt and Road Initiative in
Yes.
Asia, and they're building a railway from Kunming, which is in Yunnan. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful place. And anyway, just north of Thailand, although Laos uh, comes in over the top. Thailand does not connect with China, but has Laos in between. But just tell us, and I think this train line is going to go through Vientiane in the capital of Laos. They're supposed to do a spur off to Chiang Mai, where we lived for almost a year, and then further. Then it's going to go down to Bangkok, and eventually all the way down to Kuala Lumpur and Singapore in the south. Just give us a quick update on that.
Okay, so yeah, again, something other people might not realize is that they are building this high-speed rail line already. It's under construction. There has been a lot of progress in Laos, and it's already under construction in Thailand. There's sections of the line that are already being built, and they've already built the Grand Station at Bang Se, which is gigantic. It's modern. It still hasn't fully opened, but it's it's being built specifically, not only to accommodate all of Thailand's other state railway trains, but also high-speed rail. So this is something that is definitely happening. And, the first step will be to connect Kunming to Bangkok. And then after that, eventually it'll go down further south, hopefully all the way to Singapore. But for now, what's already being constructed is the leg from Bangkok to the border of Laos. I mean, as far as Thailand is concerned. I think there's also high-speed rail that they're talking about going down if you look at Thailand, it's got like a gulf, and this would continue down the west coast. But they're also talking about another high-speed rail line going down the east coast. And I'm not sure if they're going with Chinese or Japanese, because again, like Thailand still tries to balance their relations. They don't want to be too dependent on anyone. And you can actually see this with their mass transit in Bangkok. They do buy a lot of rolling stock from China, but also from Germany. And I think Germany is the other country that they try to balance everything with.
Okay, all right, very, very interesting. Yeah, I think for Laos especially, it's going to be massive because it's landlocked. I mean, it's
exactly.
It's sandwiched between Vietnam and Thailand. That is going to absolutely turbocharge Laos's access to the outside world and trade and transport and everything else. I'm really happy for Laos because after what the United States did to it during the Vietnam War, which is absolutely total genocide, and they're still suffering from all the 80 million unexploded ordnance, bombs, and bomblets all over the country. It's just criminal. My wife and I went to Vientiane. That's all we got to see basically, but we saw the museum about the bombs, and it's just unbelievably tragic.
Yes.
Well, listen, what about other countries? I know Thailand has a history of being anti-communist, but what about, and maybe anti-socialist, but what about although you said they have universal health care, which is very much a part of socialism, but how do you, and you mentioned Russian helicopters, but do they work with anti-imperialist socialist countries like just ticking them off, Russia, Iran, which is of course Islamic socialism, Venezuela, even North Korea, and of course I know Japan has a huge, especially with automobiles. Just run through Russia, Iran, Venezuela, DPRK, and Japan for us.
Okay, so with Russia, I think it's a matter of logistics as to why Thailand doesn't really do all that much trade with Russia. But like I said, they purchased helicopters from them. They went to them, among others, regarding main battle tanks. They were considering T-90s, and then they went with Chinese main battle tanks. So most of that is military related.
Okay. All right.
They were also talking about making deals with them regarding technology because, as part of US-backed color revolutions, social media platforms based in the US play a key role in destabilizing a country. So I think they were also thinking about doing some sort of deal with Russia regarding that. So yes, they are open to doing business with Russia. I'm not so sure about Venezuela, but I do know that they do trade with North Korea because it's one of those issues that they have to constantly pay lip service to the US, like, okay, yeah, we'll do that, but then they just keep trading anyway. And it's the same with Iran also. They do business with Iran and they do what they can to try to avoid trouble. So it's not like they're going to side with the US. They're going to just do whatever they have to get the US off their back, but then they're going to still try to do what's in their own best interest, which is trading with these countries, because Iran also is not a small country. It's a significant country, and you can't just rule them out just because the U.S. said so. You have nothing to benefit from doing that. And so Iran, Russia, North Korea, and obviously like China. So this notion that the Thai government is anti-Chinese or that the monarchy is anti-Chinese or anti-communist or something like that, I think it's kind of ridiculous. They do business with everybody. They don't really have a blanket ideology that they go by. They kind of pick and choose whatever they think will work best. So like universal healthcare just makes sense. It's a good idea. It benefits everybody. And so that they do that. They have public housing. They have a lot of public programs where the government is handing out state money to help people. They also have state-owned enterprises. Like I just talked about the state railway. That is a state-owned enterprise. And a lot of the privatization that happened under Thaksin Shinawatra. Like PTT was the big national oil company that was privatized under Thaksin, and it's been kind of like a tug of war to try to undo that, which is it's difficult. Like because once they sink their hooks in, it's very hard to undo that. So yeah, so I would say Thailand is not anti-communist. They're not communist, not anti-communist, and they mix a lot of socialist policies into what they do. They have a strong free market, but they also have a lot of socialist. I would say like a safety net for the public.
Yeah. Well, we actually went to one of the local hospitals in Chiang Mai. We walked out, and it was like, I can't remember what it was, like 120 baht or something. It was like $4.
Yeah, that's not even with that's not even with the subsidized. Because if you're Thai, you don't even have to pay that much.
Yeah, and you get these if you're Thai, you get coupons.
Yeah.
And so what's that I want to say? What about, I know, I mean, it seems like every 3 out of 4 or 5 or 4 out of 5 cars are Japanese. The Japanese must have a huge presence in Thailand.
They do. It's mostly business and, like you said, the auto industry and maybe appliances. But the auto industry, there's a lot of Japanese factories that are based in Thailand, and these are all jobs for Thai people. It's also a business opportunity for third-party auto part manufacturers that send there. But they have U.S. car factories here. And Japanese. I'm not sure about, but I know for sure American and Japanese companies have their factories here in Thailand. So it's a part of doing business. And Japanese businesses, especially when they were surging in the 80s, they made a lot of inroads into Thailand then. So that's still kind of the momentum coming off of that.
Yeah, and also Thailand, we were, our internet connection was better in Chiang Mai than it is here in France, and
yes,
and the post office is incredibly efficient.
Yes, it is.
It's just and not expensive, and I don't know if that's government owned or not, but
yes, it is.
Yeah. The post office is just unbelievable. And just the roads and the infrastructure, and it's actually an incredibly sophisticated country and people. And well, listen, this has been really. I do want to ask you one other thing. What about that project to the Kras Canal? Is that going anywhere? I mean, is that even realistic, or is that just pie in the sky stuff? I mean, what do you think? This is for the friends, fans, and followers out there. In order to avoid the Straits of Malacca, which the United States could easily blockade to keep basically all of Asia from shipping between Africa, the Suez Canal, Iran, Saudi Arabia, etc. The U.S. could blockade the Straits of Malacca between what's that big island in Indonesia, but in Malaysia, and so there's been talk about this canal to cut across Thailand. I think it's called the Kras K-R-A-Z Canal. What's going on with that?
So yeah, this is a topic that comes up very often, and it's a idea that comes and goes. But I think now when you see the capacity of China to do these huge infrastructure projects, I think if they were really determined to do it, they could do it. And I think right now it's a political it would be a political impasse, because obviously you already see the U.S. is putting pressure on Thailand with these, these mobs in the streets and everything. And that's because of the high-speed rail and the growing military relationship Thailand has with China and the trade. And so this would be like the last, like the last straw. I don't know what they would do after.
The last stick in the last stick in the ogre's eye.
Exactly. But short of doing a canal, they have actually talked about doing kind of like really developing the infrastructure so that you'd have a port on both sides and then connect it by trucks, shipping the containers. So that might be something that we actually do see first.
Or
if you see
rail.
that first, or rail, that would be a huge boom for that area. The South is already a pretty prosperous place if you compare it to, say, the Northeast, for example. But this would really, again, like you said, for Laos, it will really charge the area that would be happening. And I think that is possible in the short term. And if we see that happening, the possibility of actually doing a full-fledged canal, that might follow. It might go from just being an idea that gets kicked around every couple of years to actually something that starts taking shape. We have to wait and see.
Yeah. Well, Brian, what are you? I know you're very busy with Land Destroyer, and you do a lot of outstanding investigative journalism. Have you ever thought? Are you maybe going to write a book? I know you started a YouTube channel now that you're out of the ID closet. You've started a YouTube channel that's really doing very, very well. Have you ever thought about writing a book?
I sort of kind of wrote a book about the conflict in Syria, and this young man named Niall Bowie, he actually put everything together. And I was going to because at that time I was anonymous. I didn't want knowing who I was. So I said, if you're willing to put the book together, you can take all the royalties or whatever from this company that wanted to publish it. Well, the company published it, but so I don't know, something went wrong with the deal between him and the company. And he and I decided that we just publish it for free. So if you actually go to Land Destroyer, my website, and it's on like the side right bar, you can just download it for free, PDF.
Oh, really? I didn't notice that.
It's about the Syrian conflict, and it's it's old, but if you read it, you could see it said like the gateway to World War III, and you could see how close that if you read it then, that was kind of when it was still uncertain what was going to happen, and you could see how Russia and China just completely clashed in Syria after that book was written. So I think you would still learn a lot about how the U.S. gets these kind of conflicts going, the role of the media and these fake NGOs that the U.S. creates and uses, and how they used this proxy violence to destroy Syria. And it applies to everywhere around the globe, even to this day. So yeah, there's that book. I'm not sure if I would write another one. I think because like I have to do like a real job also on the side, because like for Land Destroyer, I don't have ads or anything on there. I'm not going to monetize YouTube because they're just going to delete my channel eventually anyway. So I have to do regular work.
I've already gotten one warning from YouTube, so 2 more and I'm off. So it's just the censorship is just brutal. Well, I tell you what, please, of course, I have your Land Destroyer website, which I'll put on the interview page. But if if you don't go to the webpage, just search Land Destroyer stuck together, and you'll find Brian or his old pen name, nom de plume, Tony Cartalucci, and also Brian. If my wife and I were told there was a really good book in English about Thailand that was told from the from the Thai perspective, and not from the American or European perspective. If you know the name of that book and can send me the link, I'll add that to the list. Or any books that you can recommend about Thailand for people who want to learn more about Thailand, please include those. And anyway, any closing comments before we say goodbye?
Well, I would just say that when looking at Thailand, just keep in mind that a lot has changed since the Vietnam War, and please understand that these protests in the street it's a bad sequel to the Hong Kong mobs that we all know the U.S. government was behind. So I just want people to keep that in mind and don't let the idea of, oh, it has a monarchy and has a military-led government, don't let that put off people on the left side of politics from seeing what's actually being done to Thailand, because Thailand has pivoted towards China and is an important ally of China and has an important relationship with China. So if you're a supporter of China and the kind of paradigm that China is trying to create to replace what the West has done for so many years, try to just take a fresh look at Thailand. Yeah, and that's about it. Because I live here. I love the people here. I love this country, and I don't want to see it turned into Hong Kong, or worse yet, Syria or Libya or something like that.
Or Ukraine or mob.
Or Ukraine, exactly.
The Maidan mobs. That was all U.S. backed. I understand the ones in Myanmar, with the Muslims, that's being fomented by the CIA. Everywhere you go, it's just nonstop U.S. Imperial intervention in hopes of getting a stooge government or leader in, so that they can rape and plunder the country. So, well, listen, Brian, this has been super. I've had on the show today Brian Berletic, and his website is Land Destroyer. And I will put all that on the website. For me, this is a real personal pleasure, because you and I have been communicating with each other for, I'd say, maybe 4 or 5 years by email, and to finally know who you really are. And because when we were in Chiang Mai, I was going, God, I'd like to contact Tony, but I bet he doesn't want me to know who he is.
Yeah, true. At that time I was kind of paranoid. So
yeah. So, but now when we go back to Bangkok, we can get together and have a Singha beer and a full Thai meal together.
Okay.
Hey, listen, Brian, thank you so much for being on, and I look forward, and I will also get this transcribed, because there's a lot of people who like to read out. And I'm really happy we did this together, and I'm sure we'll stay in touch by email and share information. So thank you so much for being on, and we'll be nostalgically thinking about you back in Thailand.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeff. I really appreciate it.
All right, bye-bye.
Okay, bye.